Now get ready, because the story I'm about to tell you isn't just dry lines from a textbook. This is a drama of desperation, betrayal, and mad hope, played out in the very last days of the hell we call the Second World War. We're going to get swept up in the whirlwind of events surrounding one specific SS division, whose name is deceptive. Polizei. Sounds almost civilian, right? But behind that facade hid a real war machine, which in the final days of the war made a desperate dash west, trying to save their own skins. Did they make it? Stay until the end. In the finale, you'll encounter a brutal historical irony that will flip everything you thought about fair retribution on its head. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what you think. What's more terrifying, to die in battle or to stand before a court? Your opinion is priceless. Let's dive in. Part 1. Not just cops. Who were they and where did they come from? To understand the agony of May 1945, we need to go back to the very beginning. Imagine Germany in the mid-30s. The Nazis had been in power for only a couple of years, but the system of total control was already being built. The police were a key tool. They weren't just repainted. They were ideologically restructured, transformed from guardians of order into guardians of the regime. It was from these ranks, from ordinary patrolmen, criminal commissioners, and gendarmes, that in 1939 they began to form what would become the 4th SS Police Division. It's important to give some historical context here. The Waffen-SS was not a homogeneous mass. There were elite divisions recruited on racial principles, like the Leibstandard or Das Reich. And then there were ones like this for special purposes, formed from policemen, firefighters, even customs officers. Their original task: rear security, cleansing operations, fighting partisans. But war, especially on the Eastern Front, is a great leveler. It consumed resources at a monstrous rate. And soon, these cops had to pick up not just batons, but real frontline weapons. And here's our first emotional hook. Picture these men. A policeman from Cologne or Hamburg just yesterday, who knew how to break up a drunken brawl or catch a petty thief. He was fed into an ideological meat grinder, thrown onto the endless expanses of Russia, where the enemy was not just a soldier in uniform, but often an invisible, omnipresent threat of partisans, and the rules of war were ground to dust. What happens to the psyche? How does a person transform? They weren't born monsters. The system, the circumstances, fear, and a sense of impunity made them into what they became. Part 2. Grotesque and Slaughter. The psych attack near Luga, or how absurd bravery dies. Their baptism by fire was pure absurdity, seasoned with blood. August 1941. The Blitzkrieg is still in force, but near Luga, the Red Army is fighting back fiercely. And so the division commander, Police Lieutenant General Arthur Mulverstedt, makes a decision that would make any career officer's hair stand on end. He lines up his soldiers, these former policemen poorly trained for large-scale battles, and leads them in an attack, standing upright, with unfurled banners, shouting, "Forward, boys!" Let's stop and picture this scene in all its horrifying detail. A field, trenches on the other side, the drone of engines somewhere far off, and a line of men in gray-green uniforms, marching as if on parade, towards lethal positions already zeroed in by artillery and machine guns. This isn't bravery. This is theater of cruelty, staged by a man who, apparently, was stuck in romantic notions of 19th century warfare. What was he thinking? That the Russians, seeing such a sight, would falter and run? The reality was instantaneous and merciless. The Soviet artillerymen probably couldn't believe their eyes, and they opened a barrage of fire. The attack was mowed down in a matter of minutes. Mulverstedt himself was killed. This episode is key to understanding the division's entire fate. It was a demonstration of absolute, criminal incompetence in matters of real war. And as if in punishment for this stupidity, fate condemned the unit to the dirtiest, darkest pages of the war, the anti-partisan struggle. The very one where the line between front and rear, between soldier and executioner, is erased. Part 3. Metamorphosis. From executioners to elite, tanks instead of batons. By 1943, the scales of the war had tipped. Stalingrad, Kursk, Germany was desperately in need of living bayonets and armor. And so our division, battered and covered in the dark fame of executioners, began to be urgently upgraded. It was renamed the 4th SS Polizei Panzer Division. And here, pay attention, real power arrives. A whole battalion of heavy Panther tanks. Picture these steel monsters, weighing nearly 50 tons, with a long-barreled gun capable of piercing the armor of any Soviet tank from a kilometer away, plus a company of Stu-G3 assault guns. On paper, this was now a formidable force, almost elite. But here lies a paradox I want to analyze from an economic and production standpoint. By 1944, German industry, despite the bombings, was churning out a huge amount of equipment. But where was the shortage? In qualified crews, in fuel, in spare parts. You could receive a battalion of Panthers, but if your tankers had spent years clearing villages, not dueling with T-34s on open ground, the usefulness of this equipment would be minimal. The division got the iron, but it didn't have time to gain the necessary combat spirit and tactical cohesion to use it. Its combat path during this period is astonishingly vague. It flashes in reports, but with no loud victories. As if the fearsome name and new equipment could never hide its true, original essence. Part 4. The Danzig Pocket, the place where the legend of equipment ended. And now we approach the apotheosis, the beginning of 1945. East Prussia, Danzig, present-day Gdansk. Into this giant pocket they drove everything that could still hold a weapon, including our Panzer Division. And here happens what can be called the technical and human annihilation. I studied the reports on the division status by March 1945. The numbers are chilling. Remember that fearsome Panther battalion? From it remained 2 inoperative machines. Out of 24 Stu-G3 assault guns, only 7 were operational. Personnel losses exceeded 50%. Picture this chaos. A city in flames, panic, Soviet tank wedges tearing through the defense, and you're trying to evacuate your immobile, broken Panthers under fire from Katyushas. This wasn't a battle, it was a beating. Danzig became a meat grinder that chewed up the division's last claims to being a serious formation. What was left was a battered, demoralized mass of people, obsessed with one thought: survive. Part 5, the finale, the flight west. A race against time and conscience. April-May 1945. Berlin is under siege, but the division, or rather its pitiful remnants, miraculously avoids being captured in the capital. And a clear, order-like goal is set before them: break through to the west at any cost to the Americans. The Elbe River becomes their line of hope, an almost mythical salvation. Let's do a little historical analysis. Why to the Americans? The myth of the clean Wehrmacht and the dirty SS was already cracking at the seams back then, but among the soldiers lived a firm belief: they were treated better in the West. The Russians, who had gone through the hell of occupation and punitive operations, of which the Polizei division had carried out many, would not stand on ceremony. The Americans were perceived as more civilized, more law-abiding opponents. This was a bet on the mercy of a victor who was himself tired of war. And they went, abandoning their last heavy weapons, turning from a military unit into a crowd of refugees in uniform. They broke through the combat formations of other, now desperately resisting German units that were supposed to cover their retreat. They went, knowing that behind them was a vengeance that was about to catch up. They were lucky they managed to reach American positions and surrender. It seemed the goal was achieved. Salvation was found. But, Part 6, Epilogue. The bitter pill of justice. And here is the most bitter, most intriguing irony of history that few talk about. They managed to surrender to the Americans. But it didn't save them. After the war, many officers and soldiers of the 4th SS Police Panzer Division stood trial. But not an American trial, a Polish, Czechoslovak, Soviet one. For what? For war crimes. For punitive operations against civilians. For burned villages. For executions of hostages. For everything they did during the quiet periods between frontline battles. The Americans and British, after conducting filtration, willingly handed over such specialists to the countries where they had committed their crimes. So their flight to the West was merely a postponement. They avoided instant retribution on the battlefield but fell into the mills of justice, which, though not always perfect, still tried to call things by their proper names. The dark legacy of the division is not just a memory of cruelty. It's the story of how a system takes ordinary people and turns them into cogs in a machine of terror. And then, when the system collapses, these cogs try to run from responsibility. But history, like a stern judge, has a long memory. Friends, there we have uncovered this dark page. What do you think? Was their fate just, or in that meat grinder, was there no longer room for personal responsibility? Write in the comments. Let's have a heated discussion. And if such deep, multifaceted stories touch a nerve, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I have many more such ambiguous, gripping, and absolutely non-textbook stories about history, which is always more complicated than it seems, prepared for you. Your engagement is the signal that we're on the same path.